Hi there, I'm Haleigh.
And I'm Jonny.
And you're listening to Jonny, Haleigh, Day of
Fun. Who do we have on today?
I don't know. Let's dive in and find out. Well, welcome everyone to another episode of the Day of Fun podcast. I'm Haleigh here with my brother John, and we've got Josh Cuny over here from the 𝓕𝓻𝓪𝓷𝓴𝓲'𝓼 YouTube channel and also does Horror Hangouts. We got to come join you on your podcast. How you doing today?
I'm doing fine. How are you doing on this holiday weekend?
Doing great.
I forgot for a hot second that it was a holiday weekend, but yes.
Well, it's rainy as always, so.
I know.
So well, in our neck of the woods anyway.
Yeah. Where we're at, it always rains on Memorial Day weekend, so you never get to really do anything.
If you're going camping, you're going to be inside a lot.
Yep, that's what happens. Well, so Josh, you do have your YouTube channel and you do some writing. So why don't you start off by telling, the folks at home a little bit about you. What made you start a podcast and why did you select horror as your fun little genre that you're working on right now?
Well, it didn't necessarily, when I started the YouTube channel, it didn't start out that way. I started it back a few years ago, and it really started out as a Las Vegas travel channel of all things. Mm-hmm. It used to be called Big Slick Vegas. And where the name Big Slick comes from is if you've played poker, especially Texas Hold'em, when you get the hand ace king, that's considered Big Slick.
Okay.
Then on top of that, I had a old English bulldog whose name was Slick. So I thought, and he passed away. So I thought this was a good way to create kind of like a memorial or a.
I was going to say, because you've got that bulldog logo as your Big Slick Adventures logo.
Hence that. So I've done that, and because I go to Vegas quite a bit on vacation, at least once a year since I turned 21. And then as I've done it, I decided I wanted to do other different things with the channel. And instead of doing a separate one, I just said, well, let's just change it to Big Slick Adventures and add whatever I want to do with it. And then when I started thinking about doing about horror, it just came down to, well, I'm a writer. I know other writers. So let's start having them on so we can talk about our books and whatnot. And it's just evolved in, of course, to the Horror Hangouts, which is a part of Big Slick Adventures, but I have that also separate on Spotify, and it's just kind of gone from there. And I've seen my viewership still small, but it's grown quite a bit in just the last couple of months due to that. So that's kind of helped quite a bit.
Yeah, no, I was going to say listen, we're all just starting. We all got to start somewhere, and there's nothing wrong with that, but we're drawing in all the people. We're calling in all the people who are the right audience members for us. Right. And I know John talked about horror is, kind of a, I don't know if you want to say a big genre, but definitely something that I think has a lot. We talked about that on your podcast too. Just has a lot of different facets you can get into. So it's kind of a rich mine for you to dig.
Well, in that, and two, I've seen so many other horror YouTube channels and it looks like they have a lot of fun. They've built their own communities. So I thought, well, besides being a writer, let me also make my contribution to horror in that way and try to grow my own community. A lot of it, obviously, through the slasher community, but also people that I also follow on Instagram, but it's mainly a lot of slasher people. I had one on last night, actually. So.
Well, and that's where we met, was on the Slasher app too. Because I had interviewed 𝓕𝓻𝓪𝓷𝓴𝓲'𝓼, who set up Slasher, and really love that idea of the community building, right? Kind of, and that's kind of the sentiment that he comes from too, right? The idea that there's not really a good space on the main social media platforms like Instagram and Facebook and stuff like that for horror, because a lot of it does get banned for even just the hashtags that are associated, or obviously that it's violent, even though, and it's we had talked about that, the idea of sort of we see it as craftsmanship when you're looking at horror movies or productions, the makeup and the prosthetics and all the practical effects, but there's not necessarily an open space for that on the main social media platforms, and so I love the idea of just if you build it, they will come. Create your own community space, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I have Damon on my show as well too. So
And horror seems to be like a big thing right now with true crime and all that stuff. That stuff's really on another level at the moment, anyway.
Mm-hmm. So
Yeah.
I know John was going to ask you a question about your Vegas.
Oh yeah,
content.
I have a specific question about Vegas in general. So on your Big Slick adventures, have you ever went to the Vegas tunnels and interviewed or saw the mole people of Las Vegas?
I have not. I know some people who have.
I did not even know this was a thing until John
this
told
is a
me,
thing. There are tunnels under there where a lot of people live under. I've never really thought. I haven't really done any interviews on my channel as far as the Vegas stuff goes. That stuff I normally do things like I'll do like say video walking tours of the Vegas Strip or downtown Vegas, do dining reviews. I'll do like lists like best hotels to go to and best restaurants to eat at. So I kind of do, and it was cool this past March. My wife and I, it was like almost like hit two birds with one stone. We went to Las Vegas, but it was for the Days of the Dead Horror Con. So it's like I got the best of both worlds out of two of my, favorite passions, Vegas and horror. What better combination? So
very cool. I did getting to go hang out. So like, in your horror interest, do you, and John and I kind of talked about this a little bit, how, horror and true crime tend to go together a little bit, right? Like if you're interested in horror, you usually kind of also have an interest in true crime. Like, do you venture off into the true crime in your interests and even in your writing maybe a little bit or anything like that?
Well, not quite yet in my writing, because I'm still fairly new into that. But as far as some like these true crime shows, there's a few shows that my wife kind of got me hooked into. Like the First 48 was one that we would watch. Also, what was it called? Homicide Hunter with 𝓕𝓻𝓪𝓷𝓴𝓲'𝓼, former homicide detective from Colorado. I did not know how Colorado Springs was that dangerous of a city until watching that show. I'm like,
that's interesting.
That's a place I was like wanting to maybe move to, perhaps. Maybe not.
Maybe not so much if it's full of all that true crime stuff. I don't need to end up on 60 Minutes, right? Like, no, thank you.
Yeah, so I have watched some of the shows, not in quite a while, but then again, there's a lot of you take like movies like the genre of giallo, for example. Most of those movies are obviously more like murder mystery movies for the most part, that are just taken to another level, obviously. And a lot of people will say that Silence of the Lambs is a murder mystery, but it certainly goes into the horror genre as well.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, so like that's kind of an interesting topic too, even just with like movies and things like that, right? That you kind of have some of those true crime horror elements that come together in the fictional setting. What are maybe some of like your favorite movies in that arena? Like Silence of the Lambs, I was just thinking of the other day too. Like I haven't seen that in a long time.
That's the thing. Silence of the out of all those movies, that's my least favorite
of
that group. Yeah, I'm not. I think it's because I'm just not a big Jodie Foster fan, and she just annoys me, to be honest. And that 20-second, that scene with Buffalo Bill dancing in front of the mirror, that's like 20 seconds of my life I'll never get back. I mean, don't get me wrong, Anthony Hopkins kills it, but my actual favorite,
Anthony Hopkins, gotta love him.
But my favorite movie in that whole series is Hannibal Rising, which is the prequel. Very underrated movie, but love that movie. And I do, and I'm often caught in between Red Dragon and Manhunter as far as which my favorite version is of that particular story, because they're both great for their own, in their own eras and whatnot, because it's hard to go against Edward Norton, but on the other hand, it's hard to go against William Pearson, who nailed that role as well. So it's like, and Brian Cox is also very underrated, playing his version of Hannibal Lecter in that particular version of it. It's directed by Michael Mann, so that's, being an 80s kid who grew up watching Miami Vice, Michael Mann doing his, I think that was like his first movie that I think he had directed at that time. So yeah, definitely. But as far as other movies, I would say a lot of the giallo movies. One that I really like, and came out in '89 and doesn't get a whole lot of love, but it's called Arabella, the Dark Angel, which is definitely a murder
Yeah, I don't know.
mystery.
Yeah.
You can find it on Tubi, and it's very, let's put it this way, if you're queasy about sex and nudity, don't watch it. But outside of
I
that,
was gonna
it's
say that's it's from those older horror movies. That's kind of standard, right? Like there's
right.
a certain like
But
those
this one,
70s and 80s horror movies,
but that
especially.
one takes it to another level. It's almost borderline. It's definitely something you might see on Skinomax back in the day after midnight.
Okay.
Let's put it that
Yeah, I was
way.
gonna say there are
All
some
right.
of those that cross over a little bit.
Yeah.
Right.
Hmm.
Well, I was gonna ask you, like, as far as like paranormal investigation shows too, do you watch a whole lot of that kind of stuff, or not really? Or have you ever been invited to do a paranormal investigation? Like,
No, but I am having a guest on next month who has done some paranormal research and whatnot. So I'm looking forward to that.
Very who are you having on?
She's also on Slasher. If you don't follow her, this is her handle, and I'm gonna probably butcher it because Who Invited Trevor is the name of
Who
her.
invited Trevor? Okay.
Yeah, her name Lacey, but she's done that and has interviewed real life vampires in the past. So I'm looking, or people that have practicing vampirism.
Okay, that's interesting.
Right. But as far as the paranormal, I used to watch this show a long time ago. It was called Paranormal State, and it was on, I think, A&E or AMC. I always get those two confused. But it's about these group of college kids from Penn State University that would go out and investigate some of these paranormal things. And I did watch the show a few years ago that Jack Osborne, Ozzy's son, was doing, and I forget the name of it, but the girl that was on there with him, she was on that show Paranormal State.
Okay.
Right,
Ozzy.
so,
I kind of miss. I remember the reality show with Ozzy. I kind of miss. Sometimes I like to think of that scene when he was running around with that popcorn machine in his house, just screaming popcorn.
Oh yeah. It really shows a side of mental illness. It's a little too touching sometimes, but it's like
I love it. I got nothing but love for Ozzy.
Oh, I know Ozzy's great.
I saw him several times in concert back, and I mean, I know he still performs, but now it's like, might be time for you to retire, dude. I don't know, but
I mean, I guess keep doing what you love until you can't anymore, I suppose, right?
Well, if the Rolling Stones can still go, I guess Ozzy can too. So
yeah, I saw Ozzy in Fargo in 2008, I think. It was we don't get a lot of stuff coming up this way, so you kind of go when you can.
I was gonna say, I don't know that Ozzy has been touring that heavily for quite some time.
He's been kind of doing his wrap up tour right now, like his last couple shows.
He first did a wrap up tour, retirement tour in '92.
Well, for sure. I mean, it's a very Kiss way of retiring.
I know. I was just gonna say that's like Kiss. It's always their final tour, right? Like, but then Gene Simmons is gonna swoop back in there and be like, "Nah, we got to sell some more merch. We got
we need some more money.
Yeah, we got to keep this train rolling." That's all right. Again, Gene Simmons, I got nothing but love for him too. Go ahead, man. Keep that merch train rolling. Good for you.
But I guess back to like the paranormal investigation, what would be like a number one paranormal investigation you could not turn down? Like a location. Like even if you weren't really into it, just
I'm trying to think. Well,
because we were gonna ask too, like in Vegas, like what
in
are some
Vegas,
like what are some haunted spots in Vegas that you might know? I'm glad
you brought that up because there are places. The old, what used to be known as Bally's Casino, it's now known as the Horseshoe. But way back when, it was the original MGM, and in around '86 or '87, when it was still the MGM, there was a big fire, which many people were unfortunately killed in. Now, I've stayed there a couple times, but I have heard stories of there being some hauntings there, or ghosts. Downtown on Fremont Street, there's the Apache Hotel, which is attached to the Binion's Casino, and I hear that place is haunted. Benny Binion, who used to own the place, started the place, was known for having some ties, as many of the original owners did, to organized crime. And it said that there may have been some people perhaps may have been their lives came abruptly to an end in that place. And I've heard there's a lot of hauntings in that place. So there has been some shows I think done on that, but I wouldn't mind seeing some more there as far as the history of Vegas. I wonder too if the old Stanley Hotel, where The Shining was filmed, I hear that place might be for real haunted. So I'd be interested in maybe seeing something on that.
Yeah. Well, like the Comedy Store in Los Angeles.
Los Angeles, yeah.
That was a gangster hangout too. What was his name? He was in that. It was a movie based on him. I can't remember his name.
I can't remember either, but
there's
I know
a bunch of them. There's all kinds.
He was a gangster. Yeah, that was a gangster place, and apparently that is like crazy haunted.
You gotta love it when that true crime, like organized crime history and like the paranormal stuff comes together. Like that's always kind of fun for me when you get to
do. A show on Netflix came out a few years ago. It's about, and I can't remember the name of the hotel now, but it was somewhere in, I want to say in the Hollywood area.
Cecil.
The
Cecil. Yeah.
The Cecil Hotel.
Where this lady who was vacationing just disappears. And like the last footage they have of her was in an elevator.
Yeah, the 𝓕𝓻𝓪𝓷𝓴𝓲'𝓼 story. That one super fascinates me too. Like that documentary on Netflix. I think John, you and I watched that and maybe did an episode about it.
That hotel is pretty. It's like Richard Ramirez stayed there.
Yep.
There was a bunch of writers and like comics and stuff that stayed there, just to party and
And of course, it's like pretty much where it's located. It's in one of the worst areas of that town.
Well, right, but that's Richard Ramirez wasn't the only like serial killer through there either. I think
there was a bunch. I can't remember. There was a list of people. Like there was writers, comedians, serial killers, all kind.
Yeah, no, but the 𝓕𝓻𝓪𝓷𝓴𝓲 stuff is really super weird and trippy I mean, they still don't really have a valid answer for what happened, like because and the elevator footage is super weird of her standing in there and like she's kind of talking to somebody maybe outside of the elevator. It's very eerie weird.
It almost seems like if there was someone there that someone conveniently removed that person out of that video, if that was the case, or it's a ghost, one of the two, or she was crazy and talking to somebody that wasn't there.
Well, that was the other thing that, that they were saying is that she had been on some kind of medication that she was off of. And so like, maybe she was, having some kind of like, I don't want to say psychotic break necessarily because that's maybe the state that I live in most of my days. And I'm so very lucky nobody comes around here with like a straitjacket and takes me away. But it's all right. I have my freedom still. We'll be good.
We all have our days.
We all have our days. It's true.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask you too for like your writing. Do you? So and you said you kind of knew with the writing too, but what are some of your favorite elements when it comes to like writing the fictional horror stuff? Do you like the paranormal, supernatural elements most? Like I'm a big fan of like. We talked about on your podcast too, like I love monster movies. Like I would love to do some like more sort of like incorporating that into my writing. Like I love the cryptids element. Like what are some of your favorite things in the creative horror spaces?
Well, for starters, I like the character building for starters, because it's almost like you're bringing your own children to life almost and seeing how they develop. And oftentimes they will do something you did not anticipate doing that just kind of goes on their own. As far as I'm one that's willing to go into any genre really as far as horror goes. So far, the first story I wrote, which obviously I didn't publish for rights issues, was a fan fiction story just for practice. That was a crossover between Hellraiser and Halloween called Hell Comes to Haddonfield. That was I
was looking at that on your website. Yep.
That was like my practice at it, just to see what I could do with that. And then the next one, the Hangman of Darkness, that was a horror Western, more or less kind of a supernatural slasher story that takes place in post-Civil War Texas. And the current one I'm working on now, which is called Tales of Castle Vasile, which I'm done with the first draft now, so we're getting close. that's more or less a vampire story. It's basically a series of 7 tales that all come back to this castle. They're all interconnected, so it's kind of like an anthology. And besides the vampire horror element, there's also a lot of eroticism in it as well, because that kind of goes with vampires anyway. So it's got a little bit of something for everyone. So there's a lot of dark humor in it. There's a little bit of romance in it. There's a lot of brutal killings in it.
Yep.
So and
So
a lot of sex in it as well.
So if you're
Yeah.
a horror fan, you will be happy with it. It's got all the elements of classic horror that you would want to see.
Right. And if you're someone who likes erotic fiction, you're going to like that as well. So
I mean, that is kind of an interesting approach, though, that you started with sort of like a fan fiction as a practice sort of element. I mean, that's something that it's kind of like, artists would, imitate like maybe an artist that you like, or, if you were a director or what have you, sort of mirroring what influences that you have. So like, what are some of like your influences for, when it comes to creativity? Like, what are some of the people that you draw from?
it's really a lot of it, even as a writer. And to go off that too, Jonny would relate to this as a musician. When you first start playing songs, well, first thing you're doing is you're doing covers, and then you start writing originals. Well, that's with the fan fiction. That was me doing a cover, basically,
There you
only
go.
a mashup. But as far as my influences, obviously early on, it's really the movies that inspired me to write, because at that point, I hadn't really read a lot of fiction. Most of the stuff I read was like historical biographies and whatnot. But with any good movie, you have to have a good story behind a good movie. So early on, it was basically anything that John Carpenter has done. It would be some of the Stephen King movies and adaptations of Hellraiser. That's my favorite franchise to begin with. And of course, Clive Barker, probably the first writer I really started reading, even before Stephen King. So those were the ones that kind of rubbed off on me a little bit. Obviously, the Friday the 13th franchise is Friday the 13th is the AC/DC of horror, because you know exactly what you're going to get with every movie.
Yeah.
And because that's what they say. Every AC/DC album sounds just like the one prior, which not necessarily true, but for the most part, they're hitting the same notes and the same progression. That's what Friday the 13th does. They're the fast food of horror. You know what you're going to get every time you watch a movie. And it's when they kind of go off the mark is when it, but
there's
by and large, that movie doesn't have a bad, I guess you could argue maybe Jason Takes Manhattan or Jason Goes to Hell, but outside of that, I don't think there's a bad movie really in that whole franchise. But but then there's the classics too, like Dracula and Frankenstein, and I love the Legend of Sleepy Hollow as well. So a lot of the classic tales also probably influenced me, and newer writers that I've gotten to know and become friends with. There's the book 𝓕𝓻𝓪𝓷𝓴𝓲'𝓼, which if you haven't read it, read it. Written by 𝓕𝓻𝓪𝓷𝓴𝓲', and Natasha Sinclair, from Oceans Apart, as one's here in the United States, one's in Scotland, and I'm going to have them on my show next month as well. So
they like collaborate and write like horror books together.
Yes, they have this.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and they were able to do this, and they've never met in person either. So this was done however they did it, and so they're favorites of mine. And
that's the magic of this like time-space reality that we live in, where we've got all of this like internet and the Zoom calls and all these things you can do, that you can like collaborate with people that you haven't actually met in person, but
which is
really
something
cool
I would
things.
love to do somewhere down the road, is find a bunch of, even if it's like doing a short story anthology where we each come up with our own story and just kind of come up with a general theme and try and meld them together, I guess.
You got to get on LinkedIn and check out Lonnie Ray. She does the 𝓕𝓻𝓪𝓷𝓴𝓲'𝓼 series, which and that's like a collaborative anthology series of writers that more that you write your own story. But I do love that, like the idea of collaborating with somebody for a book. I'm working on things like that myself, and it is fun, right? Because it's fun to bounce ideas off of somebody else who like is in your same little sphere of fictional creation, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I have an idea of like a little collaboration book. We'll talk after the cast on it, but
Okay.
like it would be an interesting thing to get together. I haven't even talked to Haleigh about it, so.
Well,
Okay.
what? Tell us. Go ahead. Go.
Well, what I want to do is for this podcast eventually, because we have so many writers and creators on. I want to throw together kind of like an Edgar Allan Poe big book. I want to give you a 3-page short story, whatever, and then, you know what I mean? Like every writer do like a 3-page short story and then put a book together. Send it to everyone when it's all completed and stuff like that.
That would be good. I'm actually going to be doing something similar to that. There was a person I know on Facebook who's also a writer invited me to, I guess there's like a total 10 writers and we're each putting our own short stories. And I guess that's going to be a book at the end of the year. So that's going to be something I'm going to start working on soon because I already have the idea of what I want to do. So,
well, one thing I want to do with it too is I want to put together a list of maybe not genres, but like a list of locations and stuff you have to pull from, like 3 different things you have to write the story.
Oh, sort of have like some
kind of like a
prompt.
parameter.
Yeah, have some like writing prompts and see what different things everybody does with the same prompt.
Well, not even the same. Just have a big list of things, and you get these 3. You pick what you want, and then when it's picked, it's picked. So you know what I mean. So
that's a good idea.
Yeah, throw something together like that.
That's kind of fun. Like again with like the paranormal investigation. So like I just started hosting the Global Ghost Hunt live podcast, and they have like the live events twice a year where there's live streaming of paranormal like investigations. Like that would be kind of interesting, get people together to like write about, you know, these historical locations that they've already been to, right? So again, kind of that same idea, and then have a nice little compendium of haunted locations and the investigations and the evidence you've collected for like the paranormal, for all your paranormal audience friends, because that's a big audience too out there.
Yeah. I oftentimes will do this, and I don't know if it ever becomes something, but whenever I wake up from having a really weird, bizarre dream, I will immediately open up my note app in my cell phone and just write down what it was about and just let it sit, because oftentimes you forget them. So I'm like, all right, I want to write this down in case I ever want to turn this into a story or whatever. Or if I want to sit around and analyze it, like, well, what the fuck did that even mean?
No, for sure. That's one of the big things that like Sage the Intern and I met on one of my other podcasts. Like we love to talk about dreams, but I have a whole list of, so for a long time, from like when I was like 4 years old till maybe when I was in my early 30s, like I had like really vivid, intense nightmares. And I have like a whole list, like in a Google Doc of like these, and so I have one that's a short story. I don't know. I need to write more of them so that I can have them like put together in a collection, but like I have a bunch of them outlined that I want to turn into short stories that were just like freaky, insane, horrible nightmares that I had that I remember. Like, so like, what are some of your like weird dreams that you've maybe like wanted to turn into a short story or a story?
Well, God, I get these weird, and they're not even necessarily nightmares, but I'll get like a weird dream. Like I am like there's one where I'm like back in high school, only as I am now. And I'm like, it's just bizarre.
And you're like, I can't be back this far in life. How did I get back to this level again?
Exactly. Or I'm growing up, or I'm as I am now, in the house I grew up in, and I've got like this is weird. I had like every single car that I've ever owned in my life parked there. And I'm like, that is the most, I don't know if maybe I drank something crazy that night or something.
No, but it's always kind of interesting to sort of examine your psyche a little bit and kind of see like, where did that come from, or what was I trying to tell myself, or, you know, like, because those things do fascinate me too, because I have those dreams a lot where you end up, you're somewhere, like I'll be somewhere like where I grew up, and it's kind of that thing of like, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be at work right now, and you kind of freak out and you're like, how did I get here and how do I get back, and like like you can't figure out like how you ended up where you are. And it's just, I don't know, you know what, sometimes I do kind of wish that would happen in real life though, just have like a quantum jump time slip situation where I'm like, how did I get here?
I think probably what it is, I'm wondering, I wonder if it's not a thing when you have dreams like that, going back to your past, if it isn't a subconscious thing where you're wanting to either do something different or you have a regret or something that you wish you had done differently, I'm wondering, or if it's just a thing where you just want to relive your youth one more time or
Yeah.
I think that's what probably those dreams in my case are probably about.
Well, I mean, that's kind of interesting too, though, because that's a thought that I have when it comes to like deja vu. Like when you're having a deja vu moment, I like, and this is a fun little game I play with myself sometimes, where if I'm having deja vu, I will be like, okay, I've lived this moment before in another parallel timeline. Am I remembering this moment right now so that I do something differently? But then I'm like, okay, but what do I do differently? Because what did I do before? I don't know. But so that's an interesting thought with like the dreams. Am I going back to like re-examine something that I might have missed, or that like maybe I'm trying to resolve or something like that? That's really interesting.
But when I was younger, for some reason, I don't know why, but I had a brain that would always kind of turn on me at night when I was dreaming. So in my head, there was always horror films going on. And then because I remember one thing, like you said, what was a story like back in your youth that would like scare you, whatever. I had an old neighbor, and he was the nicest old man. He was like 80 years old or whatever. He was a nice guy. I was really young, but for some reason, every time I'd go to bed, he would have red glowing eyes, and he would chase me all around the neighborhood trying to kidnap me. Don't know why, but that's just where my brain took it. It's like, I don't know. I always say my brain always would turn on me at night.
No, I get that though, and that's kind of like I would have those kind of dreams too, of like people chasing you, people coming after you to like kidnap you or whatever. Or I would
I'd be like laying in bed and all I'd see is two glowing eyes come up to my window or something. And I was like 5-6 years old. It was pretty morbid for a 5 or 6-year-old person to dream about, but
no, I mean, that is really kind of like, I'm fascinated by that stuff. I had a similar dream that I don't know, John, if we've talked about it before, but like there was like this figure that was everywhere I would go, whether I was in school or I was at my job or I was like at home, like wherever I was hanging out with friends, like around town. Like there was this figure that had like these big yellow eyes that would just like would follow me with its eyes but would never move. So like only its eyes ever moved. And like one night I woke up from that dream and like was laying on the side of my bed, and that thing was like right at the side of my bed in my face. I could see it, and I like tore up out of bed and turned the light on, right? And of course there's nothing there, but I was like, but that was the last time I ever had that dream. And it was because I had a lot of like reoccurring dreams too, like where it was like the same dream, the same.
Oh yeah, I've had those.
Sure.
Like like where you're having like, and does that happen to you too, where it's you kind of like what's going to happen already, and
yeah, because I'll sometimes have this one where it feels like someone's like it's at night and someone's like outside trying to break into the house, and I'm trying to yell at them, but nothing, I can't speak, which is bizarre, but I get that every once in a while, and I'm like, I'm not sure what the hell that has to do with anything, but
that happened, that too, like where you have those dreams when you're like in some kind of danger, and so you try to scream or you try to like and you can't, right? And or you I have those dreams too where like if someone is chasing you and then you can't get away, like you can't, like your legs won't work all of a sudden, like you can't get your body to work,
right?
Yeah.
Like does that ever happen to you in your like or is that just
I think I probably have had. I've had the classic one where you're falling or whatever. I think everyone's had those, but I sometimes get the ones. I mean, as far as like movie, I sometimes every once in a while get one where I'm being chased through the jungle by the predator.
Oh, that's
okay.
That's see, now here's the thing. Can you learn to go lucid? And this is what I want to do. Can you learn to go lucid in a dream and make it more of a game where it's like, okay, yeah, no, I like the movie Predator. Let me go ahead and I'll play Arnold Schwarzenegger and I will chase Predator. Like, and rock and roll. Let's do this. Let's lean into it. Like, that's where I'm trying to like figure out how to go lucid in my dreams so that I can like do things intentionally. Have you ever been able to go lucid in your dream?
No, I wish I could say that I had, but it'd be a lot more funner, that's for sure. But
I know. Johnny boy, how about you? Have you ever gone lucid?
I don't think so. No, like one weird thing that I was going to bring up is, have you been able to like pick up a dream where you left off like the night after? That's how kind of like my brain works too. Like it's like we're not done.
It always just starts right
You
back
know what I
at
mean?
the beginning normally.
Well, sometimes like when I sleep, it'll like end somewhere, and then I'll go to sleep the next day, and it'll just begin right where I
Wow.
left off. It's
That's
weird.
pretty neat.
No,
But-
that's kind of interesting because I've had that with like, like Josh, what you're saying, where I've had this particular
Mhm.
dream before and it'll just like start over
Mhm.
from the beginning. But John, I don't know, like it kind of triggered something for me when you said that, but I can't quite remember where it's like, but I get what
Well,
you're saying, where like
yeah.
you go to sleep and then you pick up where you left off, almost like you're watching the same
Yeah.
movie.
Well, it's not. It's okay. I should correct that. It's not even like it picks up at the same exact point. It's about it. It goes into a little bit, and then it's an overlap, and then it begins, and then it starts right where it ended.
Well,
so
it's
it's
kind of
like
like
it
a,
almost starts as its own thing, and then
it's kind of like a TV show recap, right? Like when
Kind
you
of.
come to the next episode and it's like
it's
last Johnny Time Dream
Yeah.
episode, we were talking about
Yeah.
this, and
Well,
just to
it's-
remind you,
it's weird because it's not even much of a recap of the same thing. It's like you're going off on something completely different, and then all of a sudden, there you go.
And you're like, oh, yeah.
it's just a right turn.
that's right. I was
I
doing
was
this.
like, all right, I guess we're going this way again.
I have. Do you? Sorry, this is like not necessarily the horror hangout stuff or whatever, but
No, it's fine.
Go ahead.
a dream time is super fun times for me. Do you ever have those dreams where you like are like this is like a reoccurring theme for me too, where you're like looking for your car, or you're like at an airport trying to get to, like, there's a travel element for me where I'm like trying to get somewhere, but
Mhm.
I like can't find my gate, or I can't find like my car, and I'm like, where did I park my car, kind of thing.
I don't think I've ever had those happen. Maybe that's because some people have a difficult time of traveling. I don't.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, sometimes traveling, especially when you're going through security at the airport, can be a pain in the
Mhm.
ass. But for the most part, I don't have any type of fears of it. So I'm wondering if with you have some sort of inner fear or anxiety about traveling.
Maybe that could be. I'm not sure. Like, because I know I've had dreams too where I'm like trying to go to like I'm doing some kind of international travel, and something happens when I'm supposed to be going back,
Yeah.
but like I can't find my passport or something, and I'm like stuck, overseas or something like
Mhm.
that, and I can't get back, sort of thing. And it'll always, for me, it's always that thing of like, where is my dog and who's taking care of my dog? Like,
Yeah.
if I don't get back in time, who's taking care of Lucy? I
Yeah.
freak out.
Well, like how my dreams ended up being kind of morbid too. I think that had a lot to do with fear of because I would watch horror movies, but I wouldn't really like them. I was not a horror movie fan when I was younger, and I think that's
Why were
kind
you
of
watching them then?
because my family was watching them, and that's the thing. There's one TV in the house, and there's not much else to do, so you sit there and you watch it. And like, though, I think we talked about this last time we talked, but Blade was a big one for me. Just all the gore
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
just freaked me out. I was like, I
Really?
can't remember how old I was. I was like 6 years old or something. That screwed me up for about a month. Like my dreams went crazy with Blade. But like I would always. That's why I didn't really like it, because I think it would get in my head and it would become a real thing. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Mhm.
That just triggered me to remember something else. So I talking about like things from movies that bleed
Mhm.
into like your dreams, but I would also have, I don't think I realized how often I had the sort of like, I don't know if you'd call it night terrors, but like where you would see
Yeah.
something because you're like kind of like just halfway asleep. I saw, in Beetlejuice when he shrinks the dude's head, or like shrinks his head with the powder,
Mhm.
right? And his head
Yeah.
gets tiny. I woke up from like a weird dream about like some kind of shaman who was like shrinking people's heads, right? And like woke up, and this, I don't know, I think I was maybe like, I had to have been like 8 or 9 years old, but woke up and in these shelves in my bedroom, like looked over in these shelves and could see these like little shrunken heads in these shelves, like
Oh,
the shaman
wow.
had, like
Yeah.
the shrunken heads the shaman was making. Like I woke up from that dream and I could see them in the, like in my shelves, and just like freaked me again, like had to get up and turn the light on. And at the time I shared a room with my sister and she didn't like that. Like, what are you doing? I can't tell you that I just saw a bunch of shrunken heads in the shelves because
Yeah.
they're not there. Don't know what to tell you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Like that's kind of how your mind goes. It just can be your worst
Well,
enemy
so like
sometimes.
I know, and it's kind of interesting how like you're saying just things that freaked you out when you kid
Yeah.
as a kid. And I know that
Mhm.
on your website you talk about how you've loved like horror since you were 5. So you
Yeah.
obviously had a different kind of exposure maybe to horror movies. So what movies were you watching, and why were they not like terrifying to you as a kid?
It started off, it's like I worked my way up through the history because the first movie I ever watched was Dracula from 1931. There was
Okay,
like,
sure.
now I grew up in city in Indiana, I now live in Texas, and I think every city had this. They had this local independent television station,
Yep.
and every Friday night, this particular station would at 10:30 at night, whenever it was, would show one of these older horror movies, and my mom would let me stay up and watch them, and it just kind of progressed from there. It started with all these old Universal movies, went up, graduated to the Godzilla movies of the 50s, started
Yeah.
watching some of the
Yep.
Hammer films of the 60s,
Yep.
and then before you knew it, I'm watching Jaws. And I would say 1987, 88 were like my big, I guess, graduation years into modern horror, because I remember there was the summer of 87 that I sat and watched Jaws. It was on HBO or whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
I'd seen bits and pieces of it, but never watched it all the way through. Didn't scare me, though I do have a phobia of going into the water, both from either being
Yep.
eaten or drowning. So you'll never see me go into the water, especially the ocean.
Yeah.
Um,
Lake Placid did that for me.
yeah, because
I
alligators are
love
not
Lake-
supposed to be in lakes.
It screwed me up so bad. I wouldn't go in a lake I wouldn't go swimming in a lake for a long, long time.
My favorite part
It's
of that
like,
movie was Betty
oh.
White cussing like a sailor.
Oh, I love Lake Placid so
That's a
much.
great movie.
My
It's
favorite,
one of my favorites.
my favorite line in that whole movie, and I think I'm okay to say it, when she tells the sheriff, goes, "Well, if I had a dick, I'd tell you where to suck it."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh no, yeah. This is the part. If I had a dick, I'd tell you to suck it. Like, oh my god.
Yeah.
Betty White is just that ornery old lady and
Yep.
feeding
Mhm.
cows to a giant crocodile. I love it so
Well,
much.
Haleigh, you've been to the lake around my hometown. It's
Oh,
called
no.
it's called Green Lake. You can't see anything in it. It's
Mhm.
just algae and stuff. So it freaked me out because it's like that
You
could be
can't-
a foot in front of you and you would never know. You know what I mean?
Oh no,
It's
and
It's that thick of just algae. It's gross.
I'm also that person that will watch those videos on YouTube of people like feeding crocodiles and stuff like that,
Yeah.
where like you don't see anything and all of a sudden they're up out of the
Yep.
water.
Two
Like,
eyes just come up.
well, no,
Ugh.
yeah, and then there's 2 eyes and then a giant crocodile up in your face.
I will say
Yeah.
this: the only movie that I ever watched that really kind of freaked. I mean, there's been some movies that freaked me out a little bit, but the one that scared me the most was a made-for-TV movie that came out in, I don't know, 83 or 84. And it was a made-for-TV movie called Adam. Now, this was
Okay.
a real life story about the abduction and murder of Adam Walsh. If you remember,
Oh,
of course, his
yep.
dad, John Walsh,
Yep.
America's Most Wanted,
Mhm.
talking about true crime once again.
Mhm.
I was whatever 9 or 10 when he watched that movie. That freaked me the fuck out, which was
Mhm.
probably the intent of that movie. And it wasn't. Then I forget about. Then when I started having kids when they were smaller, I started thinking about that movie and
Yeah.
freaked me out once again, because I'm like constantly keeping an eye on
Yeah,
them
being extra
and-
vigilant and yeah,
Mhm.
no, I could see that 100%.
So it's probably like more like the real life stuff that happens in every day that probably disturbs me more than monsters or whatever, and I was talking about too, I saw Jaws, and then one Halloween night I watched back to back Halloween and Halloween 2 were on,
Mhm.
and those movies totally, gripped me. That was like my introduction into the modern slasher. And then a
Yeah.
month later, Alien came on network television. And so, just kind of steamrolled from there. And the following summer, I watched Hellraiser for the first time on VHS. And then later that year, I saw both. Halloween 4 was the first R-rated horror movie I saw in a theater.
Mhm.
And then during the previews for that, before they showed the movie, of course, they had previews. they showed the preview for Hellraiser 2, and I'm like, well, I've got to see that one. And I end up buying a ticket to some G-rated Christmas movie because it came out in December, and then sneaking in to see Hellraiser 2. So,
I do kind of wonder, like, that's something that we used to do when I was in high school too, right? Like, you'd get the G-rated ticket and then you'd sneak into the R-rated movie. Do kids still get to do fun things like that anymore? Or has life become too sterile for kids anymore? Do they get to do those kind of things?
Nowadays, because movies are so readily available with streaming services, they probably don't really have the need to even do that. And plus, a lot of theaters now, they get your assigned seats and all that, so it's probably a little bit more difficult to do.
True.
I'm just wondering if my kids I don't think my kids have done it because they don't really have to, because they're now at the age where, it's like, as a parent, I was like, okay, are they ready to watch this movie? And then I have to go back. Well, I was 14 when I saw this type of movie, so I think they'll be okay.
Listen, my dad was letting us watch Animal House and Porky's when I was 11. So
I was like the flip on that. My dad wouldn't let me watch. That my parents were divorced, so my dad wouldn't let me watch that stuff because he's a real strict conservative Catholic, and my mom, very liberal-minded person, would let me. I remember she actually made me watch. Oh, you've got to watch Beverly Hills Cop. This is terrific.
Yeah, my dad was like,
and she'd be like,
the other way around for me. My mom wouldn't let us, and my dad would. Beverly Hills Cop, yes.
Yeah, she'd be like, now there's a lot of bad words in here, but it's really funny. Of course, she also
funny.
She also neglected to tell me that there was also boobs in the movie too. I'm like, oh,
wow. I think
a bonus.
Like the nudity element, I don't think that they remember necessarily, which is kind of interesting to me sometimes.
Yeah.
No, the 100%. We were the same way. Like when that's, I think, why John and I probably bonded a little bit too. Like we could do things at Dad and Cindy's house, like, and watch movies that we weren't allowed to.
Yeah, it wasn't
right.
I think that's kind of where my healthy fear of horror came from, because I wasn't sheltered. They kind of just let us watch whatever. And then
I think too, with me becoming more and more a horror fan, was my way of kind of rebelling against my ultra Christian dad.
For sure.
Kind of rebelling against that.
Yeah. And like Haleigh can attest to this, but like in our movie room downstairs in my mom's old house, there we had 2 iguanas. We had an iguana cage over here with 2 full-size iguanas. And you'll be watching a horror movie. It'll be silent, and then all of a sudden, a 2-3 pound iguana will just jump on the cage, and it'll just scare the life out of you.
Oh no, but it was so good, man. I love those iguanas. I would love to have iguanas again. I miss
them, Louie and Bobo.
They were good stuff. They were just trying to help us enhance the jump scares when we were watching.
They scared the shit out of me, though.
I loved them. They were fun.
But like, as kind of a wrap-up question, we're from the Dakotas, so we have like a Mount Rushmore question. So what is your Mount Rushmore of horror writers, and what is your favorite movie or book by them?
Okay, well, as far as writers, and that could pertain to both screenwriters and authors, so I'm going to lump those 2 in there. I would probably put on that Mount Rushmore, I would put John Carpenter, because he's not an author, but he's pretty much writes the scripts to all the movies he's made. I will put in my favorite of his would be Halloween, but The Thing is a close second.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Clive Barker, favorite book, Hellbound Heart. Of course, favorite movie, Hellraiser, which he wrote and directed. He only directed like 3 movies. His entire career is mostly known for being an author. And then after that, this is where it gets tough. I would have to put Stephen King. For me, he's a little bit hard to read, but when you just look at his contributions, it's really second to none, I think. All the adaptations that come up. And I would say It Chapter 1 is my favorite Stephen King adaptation, and Shining is probably a close second, even though a lot of people, including King himself, hates the movie, and I could understand a little bit. As a movie goes, it's pretty good.
Well, we talked last time about my favorite is Leprechaun, so I get plenty of grief over that. But hey, I like what I like.
Yeah, exactly. And if I was to put a fourth, I'd have to make it a 4A or 4B, and that would be Bram Stoker and Mary Shelley, just because, as far as I'm concerned, they're the godfather and godmother of modern horror. Because not only do those books that they wrote all those years ago spawned all the movies that to this day we're still watching different versions of, but for heaven's sakes, we have serial characters of those characters, Frankenberry and Count Chocula.
Oh, yeah.
Count whatever's in the Count from Sesame Street. I mean, those
the Count.
those two writers wrote characters that have just impermeated pop culture across the board and for well over 100 years now. So,
and as a writer, isn't that the kind of legacy you would love to leave, right? Something where you planted a seed that other people can grow cool things off of.
Yeah,
very cool. Well,
so I really gave you 5. So there you go.
Hey, that's all right. I dig
it. Can be as many as you want.
Yeah.
You know what?
We'll start chipping away at the other side of the mountain.
That's right. We'll go ahead and carve that extra one in there. That's fine.
Sure.
But do also tell folks before we let you go where to come and find you. We've got Big Slick Adventures on YouTube, but where else should folks be looking for you?
You can find me. Well, if you can also check out my website, which is 𝓕𝓻𝓪𝓷𝓭𝓬𝓪. That has pretty much a link to all my social media, has a link, my Amazon links to the book, Hangman of Darkness. Plus I have little blogs and little like articles that I write, just random thoughts. Oftentimes I'll just write there, normally horror related. And then of course, you can find me on Instagram, Josh74_horror_dude. And then I'm also on Slasher, Josh, I can't even remember my own handle, Josh1974_horror
I was
writer.
Say we can put the link in the description too.
Oh yeah. And then I'm also on Facebook, Josh Cuny Horror Writer. That's my professional page in Facebook, though I don't act very professional on there very often. That's because
that's okay. That's part of that whole chasing after that self-employment dragon, is that you don't have to be professional all the time. That's the goal.
And that's the thing too. Here's another thing, going back to Slasher, about 99.9% of the people that are actually real on there, whereas Instagram, it seems like 75% of the people I got there following me are wannabe amateur porn stars or something like that. It just gets exhausting because I'm told, well, you need to do a professional page on Facebook and Instagram. And
no, there's a
like
lot of
I
spam.
say, it's like I get all these scammers. They'll say stuff like, oh, I really like the way your book looks on there. It looks terrific. Why don't you only have a few views? Because I've only sold this many. That's why. And then I start screwing with it. Goes, well, actually I sell 1,000 books out of the back of my car every day at the local empty parking lot.
No, I know there's a lot of stuff to sift through, but that's, again, build your own community and the right people will come. And that is, Slasher is definitely a great place for like the horror genre, horror fans for sure, because you do have real people on there, and that is appreciated.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
For sure. Well, thank you so much, Josh Cuny, for joining us for this episode. It's been great, and we will have to have you back again sometime.
All right. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
You're welcome, man. It's been a pleasure.
Hey, thanks so much for listening, y'all. I've been Haleigh.
And I've been Jonny.
And this has been Jonny, Haleigh, Day of Fun. Thanks so much for listening. Check us out on Patreon, patreon.com/JonnyHaleighDOF, and we're JonnyHaleighDOF on Instagram and at gmail.com. Send us your hate mail. We'll read it out loud on the podcast, won't we, Jonny?
For sure.
Awesome. Thanks for listening. Peace out, y'all.
Later.
Special thanks to the Parapost Network for the support of their community. Check out all the great podcasts on the Parapost Network on Facebook.